President Trump intensified his attacks on America's central bank boss, Jerome Powell. In a post on social media, he called him, quote, a major loser.
So can Donald Trump fire him?
So presumably he should not be able to. It's for cause. And we don't know because this has never been done.
Just a few minutes ago, Donald Trump posted on social media that Jerome Powell's departure from the Federal Reserve can't come soon enough. The former president, who originally put Powell forward for the job, is now threatening to remove him, leaving an urgent question hanging in the air. Does Trump really have the power to fire him on his own? The tension rattling Washington and the markets hasn't been seen in decades. No U.S. president had ever so openly hinted at ousting the central bank chief he personally selected. Yet Trump is once again tossing the rulebook aside. The Fed, long a symbol of institutional autonomy, has become the prime target of his offensive. I will always put America first, Trump proclaims, known for his abrupt pivots. He points at Powell without hesitation. If I decide to get rid of him, he'll be gone in the blink of an eye. Lines like, I can fire him and nobody will stop me, stoke fears that economic policy could fall fully under White House control. This is more than a personal duel. It could be the first tremor in a political earthquake with global repercussions. If the leader of the most influential economic institution were ousted for electoral calculations, how would markets react? What would happen to the dollar, interest rates, inflation, and investor confidence? The story began in 2017, when Trump appointed Powell. He assumed Powell would be a pliable technocrat, but the new chair defended the Fed's independence and started lifting rates as soon as he took office, irking the president. By 2018, Trump was attacking him in public. Powell is more dangerous than China, he snapped. Traditionally, the Fed stands apart from partisan politics. Trump ignored that norm and, in the Oval Office, repeated, "If I want to fire him, I will." Powell replied that the central bank's decisions are based on what is best for Americans and on the law, free from political pressure. The clash lies here. The Constitution and the Federal Reserve Act allow a governor to be removed only for cause, reserved for ethical breaches or crimes, never for a dispute over rates. Trump's team had already weighed firing him, but backed off amid legal fog and political risk. If Trump returns to power, the plan could revive. His pick for Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, has said he will scout replacements in the fall, while the Supreme Court reviews a case on presidential authority to remove heads of independent agencies. A ruling in Trump's favor would strengthen his hand. The debate revives a 1935 precedent, Humphrey's Executor v. United States, which curbed the president's ability to sack leaders of autonomous bodies without cause. That shield has protected Fed governors for decades, but a conservative-leaning court could revisit it. Analysts recall runaway inflation and political meddling in countries without independent central banks. Turkey, Argentina, Venezuela, where governors change on a whim and rates are slashed at will. Were the U.S. to follow that path, its financial credibility would erode. A Wall Street Journal piece asks whether firing Powell would usher in an Argentinization of the U.S. economy. The comparison may be stark, but the warning is clear. The perception of institutional autonomy would hang by a thread. Trump's irritation stems from his push to inflate growth through protectionism, tariffs, and tax cuts. These measures juice short-term activity, but also stoke prices. Academic research shows tariffs, especially on China, add thousands of dollars a year to household expenses. Powell stressed that if inflation leaves permanent scars, the Fed must act. Trump retorted that rates should fall and quantitative tightening should vanish. That exchange, plus several modest rate hikes, put Powell in Trump's crosshairs. With near-zero rates, we'd have had a boom. Powell stopped it. Trump complains, pressing, "Why aren't we doing what the ECB does?" Economists say an independent central bank is crucial to tame inflation and maintain confidence. Trump's tariffs themselves boosted price indexes. A Yale study estimates his strategy raises the average family budget by about $4,900 a year, making the Fed's job tougher. During the 2020 crisis, Powell cut rates to zero, and, starting in 2022, raised them in succession to corral inflation near 9%. We're not aiming for a hard landing, but without stable prices, growth can't last, he said. Trump called the moves unnecessary and suffocating. The friction reached a point where word leaked that Trump asked advisors, "Isn't there a way to fire Powell?" Legal barriers halted him then, but if he returns, the clash could resume. The standoff politicizes U.S. monetary policy. With its 2% inflation goal, the Fed was a beacon of independence. Such attacks have already dented trust. The dollar index has slid roughly 9% against various currencies in recent months, partly due to that unease. The world is already grappling with trade war uncertainty. Questioning the Fed's roadmap could jeopardize the dollar's safe haven status. Experts warn that the dollar's reserve role took decades to build, but could corrode quickly. A weaker greenback makes imports pricier, lifts inflation, and forces Treasury yields higher if foreigners lose interest. With public debt near 120% of GDP, even a small rise in borrowing costs would add billions to the federal budget. In the short run, Trump might cheer a cheap dollar that boosts exports. Over time, inflation and credit rating downgrades would bite. Market swings would bruise companies and pension funds. Meanwhile, the surge of crypto assets and local currencies fuels a big question. Will Bitcoin, the yuan, or something else gain ground? No currency matches the dollar's scale, yet a weaker greenback accelerates the shift toward a multipolar financial order. Russia and China strike deals outside the dollar, and the global south tests alternative payment systems. A Fed forced to follow political cues could fan that trend. If Trump replaces Powell with a more compliant figure, the Fed would fall under executive sway. When the White House wants to juice growth or widen tariffs, the new chair could oblige. Slash rates, unleash fresh quantitative easing. The initial stock market thrill would conceal the risk of runaway inflation and structural fragility, tarnishing America's image among investors. Asking how much a country respects the law when it swaps the Fed chair for political motives conjures a weaker dollar and dwindling appetite for treasuries. During Trump's tenure, trade volatility already slowed global growth and made U.S. imports costlier. The China gap didn't close. Prices climbed and consumer confidence wavered. Powell, raising rates gradually, warned, "If we get complacent, inflation could become entrenched." Trump demanded deeper cuts, even negative rates. The clash fueled financial rumors. Investors shifted portfolios, fearing Powell's exit. No one likes such volatility, but political risk amplifies it. Europe watches warily. Euro-dollar parity depends on the Fed. If Powell's successor favors low rates and a soft dollar, the euro will strengthen, shaping trade disputes and NATO spending rows. Washington grumbles about defense costs, while Europe may ask whether sticking to the dollar makes sense if the Fed turns unstable. Central bank autonomy remains a cornerstone of U.S. leadership. Hardly any president has tried to oust the Fed chair. Neither Clinton with Greenspan nor Bush with Bernanke dared, fearing systemic shock. Trump's threat, therefore, unsettles many. Another taboo could fall. Polls show most Americans favor an independent Fed, though polarization muddies the debate. Some Republicans blame high rates for stubborn inflation, while others fear the nation could falter without a free central bank. For now, Powell stays put, shielded by the Constitution and a few conservative senators. Trump failed to remove him while in office, but a 2024 or 2028 comeback could shift the board. The White House appoints the rest of the governors. Even if Powell hangs on, a council packed with Trump allies could hollow out his authority, clouding the Fed's independence. In short, the Trump-Powell rivalry is more than a clash of egos. It is a test of America's economic future, the dollar's health, inflation control, employment, and global trust. Powell summed it up. "We steer the economy guided by data and long-term goals, not politics." That principle upheld the system through the 20th century. The challenge now is to see how long it endures. Public opinion swirls with questions. Some lawmakers back Powell. Others argue he cools the economy for no reason. No one knows how markets would react if he were fired. Fears range from an instant equity crash to a weaker dollar and treasury sell-offs. What comes next? Possibly more global turmoil, fresh hurdles for emerging markets, and a flight to gold or crypto. Economists dub this a nightmare scenario. Politicizing the Fed isn't just a domestic issue. It shakes one of the pillars of world stability. Many hope the pendulum won't swing that far. Even if Trump returns, counterweights could kick in. Fed law, Senate resistance, Powell's own resolve, or a Supreme Court ruling barring removal without cause. It would test American democracy, yet perhaps ensure no president again threatens the Fed's independence. Main Street could feel the impact too. If uncertainty drives up mortgage and consumer loan rates, the housing market, long a cornerstone of household wealth, might stall. Home values could slide while variable rate payments rise, curbing spending and testing the resilience of the middle class. Inside major multinationals, executives quietly concede that an abrupt Fed pivot would complicate long-range investment plans. Firms reliant on global supply chains, especially tech and auto giants, would have to recalibrate budgets against a fickle dollar and possible retaliatory tariffs. They might hoard cash, freeze hiring, and, in the worst case, shift factories outside the U.S. Wall Street. Meanwhile, faces a moral dilemma. A Fed subservient to the White House could flood the system with liquidity and spark rapid stock gains. Yet without a credible monetary anchor, the risk of bubbles and brutal corrections would rise. Asset managers would have to navigate a sea of volatility, where macro policy hinges less on data and more on the next political barrage. Startups and venture capital wouldn't escape unscathed. Unpredictable rates would push up capital costs and shorten the runway to break even. Promises of breakthroughs in AI, clean energy, or biotech could be starved of funding, slowing U.S. competitiveness just as Europe and Asia accelerate in those fields. On the diplomatic front, longtime allies like Japan, South Korea, and Australia might diversify their reserves to shield themselves from a volatile dollar. Though gradual, that shift would send a symbolic message that confidence in Washington's economic stewardship is no longer a given. A cascade of adjustments by foreign central banks would reinforce the narrative of a world learning to live without the greenback. Finally, voices within the Republican Party warn that the urge to bend the Fed could backfire on Trump. If inflation spikes and voters sense the White House has tampered with the money machine, the political cost could be huge. That paradox, seeking more control to score an immediate win while risking a structural defeat, captures the crossroads that will shape America's economic decade. Time will render its verdict. How do you see this landscape? On one side, the economic priorities of an elected president. On the other, a central bank defending autonomy and data-driven decisions. Who is right? Who is wrong? Or will all Americans and the global financial system end up losing? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe, turn on notifications, and hit like to stay updated. Thanks for watching.